Wyoming Territory, May of 1883. The wind came down from the Bighorns sharp with snowmelt and dust as the Denver and Rio Grande train hissed into the Rawlins station, a half-hour behind. Rhett Nolan swung down from his buckskin mare just as the last whistle blew. He wiped a hand down his jaw, sunburnt and rough, and stared at the platform. He did not know what he was looking for until he saw her. She stood alone, gloved hands clutching a worn carpetbag. Her bonnet was plain, blue cotton faded at the seams, but her eyes, he remembered those eyes. "Jessamine," he said low, more breath than voice. Her head snapped up. "I thought you'd never come," she said. The bag hit the platform as she crossed to him. He caught her before she stumbled, arms around her waist without thinking. Her breath hitched against his shoulder. "I would have come sooner if I'd known," he said. "Jess, I didn't even know you were alive." She pulled back just enough to look up at him. "I sent 3 letters. I waited 5 months in Abilene, then I headed west. I never got a single one." She blinked fast. "Well, you're here now." He nodded, still stunned. "I'm here." They stood there too long, drawing glances. Rhett picked up her bag and tipped his hat toward the station master. "Come on. Let's get out of town before the wind turns sour." They rode double on his mare, the saddle creaking beneath them. Jessamine sat behind him, arms light around his waist, but he could feel the tremble in her fingers. She did not speak until the town fell behind and the sagebrush opened wide. "I left everything," she said, "even the house." "What happened?" "I was married." Her voice cracked. "He died last winter, fever. Then the bank came, and folks started looking at me like I was something to be pitied. I could not stand it." "You did not bring your husband's name?" "No." "I took mine back." "You still Jessamine Jameson then?" She hesitated. "I am now." They crossed the rise where the prairie met the cottonwoods. Rhett's cabin sat nestled by the creek, a lean-to barn beside it. He had not brought a woman here before. He helped her down, hand lingering at her waist. "It is not much." She smiled, and it hit him like a punch, soft and slow but deep. "It is more than I had yesterday." Inside, the fire still held a bit of warmth. Jessamine stepped in slow, eyes taking in the single room, the worn rocker, the narrow bed. There was a quiet to her that had not been there when they were younger, but it was not empty. It was steadier. "You built this?" she asked. "Every board." She turned. "You kept your promise." He froze. "What promise?" "You said if I ever needed a place to go, you would make one. I was 16, you were 19. I thought you were just being sweet." "I meant it." "I know." That night she slept in the bed. He took the floor, though she protested. "You rode to get me," she whispered as he settled onto the blanket. "That is enough." He did not sleep much. In the morning he found her outside, sleeves rolled, hauling water from the creek. She set the pail down when she saw him. "I am not afraid of work," she said. "I know that." She looked toward the hills. "I have 2 children." Rhett's breath caught. "They are not here," she said. "I left them in Cheyenne with a widow, a good woman. I could not bring them until I knew it was safe. You should have told me." "I did not know if you would want me." He stepped forward. "I want you." She looked up at him, eyes wet. "Even with everything?" "Especially with everything." She nodded once, like her heart had finally let go of a weight. Later that day they rode to Cheyenne. It was 2 full days there and back, hard miles. When they returned, Jessamine rode with her daughter Clara, age 7, nestled against her chest, and her son Caleb, 5, sitting in front of Rhett, clutching the saddle horn. The children were quiet at first. Clara watched everything. Caleb stuck close to Rhett, eyes darting. But by evening they had softened. Rhett built a swing from old rope and a plank. Clara smiled. Caleb started laughing. Jessamine stood at the door, hand pressed to her chest. "You did not have to do that," she said. "I wanted to." That night, after the children were asleep in the bed, Rhett walked outside. Jessamine followed. The stars were out, wind gentle through the grass. "I never stopped thinking of you," she said, "even when I married. Even when I thought you had forgotten me." "I never forgot you," he said. "I just thought you were lost." She stepped close. "I am here now." He looked down at her, hand lifting to brush a curl from her cheek. "And I am never letting you go." She leaned up and kissed him soft, sure, no hesitation. And when they went back inside, they did not sleep apart. By the third week, spring had settled in earnest. The cottonwoods along the creek wore tight green buds, and soft shoots pushed through the dirt where Jessamine and Clara had sown turnips. The children rose early now, without prompting, chasing the sun and each other in wide circles around the barnyard. Rhett had built them a pen for 2 goats and run fencing for a henhouse. Jessamine planned to fill before summer. One morning, Rhett came down from the hills with a brace of grouse tied to his saddle. Jessamine stood at the chopping block, sleeves damp to the elbows, teaching Clara how to clean wild onions. The girl wrinkled her nose but didn't complain. Inside the cabin, Caleb was trying to mend a snapped toy wheel with scraps of leather and a near-empty tin of tacks. Rhett handed off the birds. "You'll get better yield if you bury fish bones under the roots next time." Jessamine glanced at him over her shoulder. "And who's supposed to catch the fish?" "I reckon I could be persuaded." She arched a brow without smiling. But her eyes held something new, something steady and quiet, like the way she'd rested her hand on his back the night before, half asleep but sure of him. That evening, after supper, they sat outside on the cut log bench facing west. The children were inside, their laughter thinning as sleep crept in. Jessamine held a piece of mending in her lap, but she hadn't moved the needle in some time. Rhett whittled a sliver of pine into something shapeless, more out of habit than purpose. "I need to take the wagon to Laramie," she said after a long silence. "There's things I can't get here. Cloth, a proper wash kettle, shoes for Clara." He nodded. "I'll go with you." "I was hoping you would." The next day they packed by dawn. Jessamine tied her hair back with a strip of calico, and Clara helped fold blankets into the wagon bed. Caleb carried a tin of dried apples and a jar of lard, his small hands careful. Rhett hitched up his team and checked the tack twice, though he'd done it 100 times before. They stayed the night halfway, in a wide clearing where the prairie stretched flat and open beneath a dome of stars. Jessamine tucked the children in with the extra quilt, then stood by the fire holding a tin cup of coffee gone cold. "I used to dream of this," she said. "Not Laramie, not the wagon. Just something solid, somewhere no one could come take from me again." Rhett tossed a twig into the flames. "You've got it now, I know," her voice caught, "but I keep waiting for the ground to shift." He reached for her hand, calloused fingers brushing hers. "It won't." She looked at him, not blinking. "You promise things like that, don't you? Only when I mean them." She stepped in close, resting her head against his chest. He held her there, the firelight flickering on her skirt hem, the scent of her hair full of wood smoke and wind. Laramie was busy, louder than the children were used to. Clara clung to Jessamine's skirt, and Caleb stared wide-eyed at the blacksmith sparks. They bought what they needed and more bolts of muslin, a kettle hammered from good iron, and a book of scripture songs Clara picked from a shelf with both hands. At the general store, Rhett ran into a man from his trail days, a tall rancher with a chestnut beard and a limp from a long-ago stampede. The man eyed Jessamine and the children with a long look, then said, "Didn't picture you planting yourself." Rhett didn't flinch. "Didn't picture a lot of things." The man nodded once and left it there. On the road home, the children dozed in the wagon bed, heads resting against the barrels. Jessamine sat beside Rhett, hands folded in her lap. You never told me why you stayed here, she said. He kept his eyes on the trail. I did a lot of leaving in my time, figured it was about time I learned how to stay. She turned toward him. And now, he looked at her, nothing hurried in it. Now I'm right where I ought to be. The wind picked up, carrying the scent of sage and warm earth. Jessamine reached across the seat and laced her fingers through his. He squeezed once, firm and sure. They didn't speak again until the cabin came into view, small against the rising hills, firewood stacked neat beside the door. Clara stirred, blinking awake, and Caleb sat up stretching. Jessamine smiled, not wide but full. "Home," she said. Rhett looked at her, then at the children, then past them all to the land that held them. "Yeah," he said, "it is." By late June, the river had slowed and warmed, and the cottonwoods sang low in the afternoons. Jessamine stood barefoot in the garden rows, skirts pinned up past her calves. Her fingers sunk into damp soil as she thinned the squash. Rhett sat on the porch rail, mending a cracked bridle strap, eyes following the rise and fall of her shoulders. Clara sat cross-legged nearby, braiding wildflowers into a crown for her brother who kept shifting to escape her hands. "You always worked like that?" Rhett asked, setting his awl down. Jessamine didn't look up. "When there was work to do, yes. But even now." "With no one breathing down your neck," she straightened, brushing dirt from her palms. "It's not about who's watching. It's about what needs doing." He nodded, chewing on that answer. Clara gave up on Caleb's crown and laid the flowers in her lap. A few bees drifted close, lazy in the heat. That evening, after the children had gone to bed, Jessamine stepped out back with a tin dish balanced on her hip. She scattered seeds for the hens, then leaned against the post, watching the moon rise pale over the ridge. Rhett joined her, his shirt sleeves rolled past the elbow, hair still damp from washing. "You ever think about building on?" she asked. He followed her gaze. "You mean another room? I mean a house. Bigger than this. Room for the children to grow. A kitchen with space to turn without knocking your elbow." He leaned his shoulder against the post beside hers. "You're thinking long ahead. I've had enough years not knowing where I'd become winter. I want to plant roots so deep nothing can shake them." He looked at her, quiet. "You want to do that here," she nodded once. "If you'll let me." He reached for her hand and held it there, warm in the dark. "Not letting you, I'm asking you to." They didn't speak again until the night cooled and the chickens settled. 3 days later, Rhett rode out early. He returned close to sundown with a wagon load of salvaged lumber, stacked neat and tied tight. Jessamine met him at the fence, eyes scanning the boards. "Where'd you come by all that?" "Old line shack 2 ridges over. Rancher sold it off for scrap. Said it was no use to him anymore." He wiped his brow. "Figured it might be use to us." Jessamine held the gate as he drove through. "It will be." That evening they laid out chalk lines in the dirt beside the cabin, arguing gently over where the stove should sit and how far from the door the new hearth ought to begin. Clara watched from the porch, Caleb tucked beside her with a stick in his mouth and his eyes half closed. "You know how to do all this?" Jessamine asked, crouching over the markings. "Enough to make it stand through snow. Might not be pretty, but it'll hold." She smiled faintly. "I don't need pretty. I need sound." That night she curled against Rhett beneath the quilt, her body warm and loose with sleep. He brushed his thumb over her knuckles, listening to the hush of the wind outside. She murmured something low, too soft to catch, but her hand tightened around his. By mid-July, the frame stood waist-high. Clara brought nails in a sling she tied from one of her old dresses. Caleb followed Rhett like a shadow, eyes wide each time the hammer struck wood. Jessamine cooked outside most days, keeping the fire low and the kettle full. One morning, Rhett motioned her over. "Come see." She stepped around the half-raised wall. He pointed to a knot in the frame near the baseboard. Look close, she squinted. The initials RJ had been carved there, small but clear. That you're doing? She asked. He shook his head. Was already there. Whoever built that shack put their mark in before they raised it. Thought maybe we should add ours. She looked at him. Then she pulled her knife from her pocket and crouched beside the post. Beneath RJ, she scratched in JJ, steady and slow. When she stood, Rhett kissed her temple. Now it's ours. That night, lightning danced silent on the horizon, too far for thunder but close enough to paint the walls in flashes. Jessamine stood at the window, watching the sky. Rhett rose from bed and wrapped his arms around her waist. Storm won't reach us, he whispered. I know, she leaned into him. I just like knowing it's out there and we're in here. He rested his chin on her shoulder. You feel safe now, she turned, eyes meeting his in the dark. I do. And for the first time in years, she meant it. By August, the roof stood finished, and the walls of the new house held the scent of fresh cut pine and sun-hardened pitch. The children slept in their own corner now, tucked beneath quilts Jessamine had pieced from scraps traded in Laramie. They had begun calling the place the big house, though it was only 3 rooms and a loft. Still, it was more than they'd had in years, and Clara had started drawing pictures of it in the dirt with a stick, always with smoke curling from the chimney. Rhett came back one evening with a burlap sack slung over his shoulder. Jessamine was kneeling near the root cellar, sorting potatoes by hand. He dropped the sack beside her gently. Found a man upriver who was selling off a few things. Traded him a bullet mold and part of that old yoke. Jessamine opened the sack and reached inside. Her fingers closed around something soft and rounded. She pulled it free, an oil lamp with a brass base and a glass chimney shaped like a tulip. She turned it in her hands, speechless. Thought it'd keep the dark out better, Rhett said. She took a slow breath. It's beautiful. Figured you ought to have something that didn't come worn out. She stood and looked at him, lamp cradled in her arms. You keep giving me things I didn't know I needed. That's the trick of it, he said, brushing dirt from her sleeve. That night, the lamp lit the table with a steady glow, and Clara read aloud from the songbook, stumbling over the longer words. Caleb lay on his stomach, tracing the letters with one finger. Jessamine sat beside Rhett, her hand resting on his knee beneath the table, thumb moving in slow circles over the worn denim. She didn't speak of it, but he felt it, how her body leaned easier into his now, how her stillness had changed from guarded to content. The next morning, she found him in the pasture, watching the sky. The horses were scattered across the slope, tails flicking at flies. Rhett's hat was off, resting over one shoulder. She walked to him, barefoot in the grass. You're thinking about something, she said. He nodded. Neighbor over east is selling off 30 acres. Land's rough, got some rock in it, but there's water. Jessamine folded her arms. You're thinking of buying it. If we're staying, we'll need more grays come spring. She didn't answer right away. Then we could plant oats, maybe some flax. He looked at her and she nodded once. Do it. Later that week, Rhett rode out to speak with the neighbor. Jessamine stayed behind, splitting kindling while the children gathered chokecherries along the fence. The wind shifted midday, bringing with it the dry bite of smoke. She stood straight, nose lifted. Somewhere north, something was burning. When Rhett returned that evening, she met him at the gate. There's fire in the hills, she said. I saw it. Still a ways off, but I'll ride out tomorrow and see how it's moving. That night she didn't sleep. Rhett knew without asking. She lay still beside him, but her hand kept moving, brushing the edge of the quilt, smoothing her night shift, touching the spot over her heart. In the morning, she saddled her mare without a word and rode with him. They left the children with the widow from 2 ridges over, a woman Jessamine had met at the spring gathering. The fire had skirted the lower slope, chewing through dry grass and scorching the bark of the smaller pines. Most of it was ash now, smoke rising in thin ribbons. Rhett dismounted at a blackened ridge and crouched beside the earth. "Stopped here," he said. "Rain must have caught it." Jessamine didn't speak. She walked a few paces farther, staring out across the charred valley. Then she knelt and pressed her palm to the ground. Her eyes closed. "I used to dream of flames," she said, voice low. "After the fever took him, I'd see the walls catch, smell the smoke, feel heat crawl up my back. I'd wake sweating, thinking the house was gone." He stood beside her. "It's not gone." She shook her head. "No. But I was always waiting for it to be." He reached down and helped her to her feet, holding her hand longer than he needed to. "It's different now," she said, meeting his eyes. "I'm not waiting anymore." He kissed her then, slow and certain, one hand at the nape of her neck, the other resting firm at her waist. No fear in it, no rush. Just the quiet truth of it between them. When they rode home, the sun was low, and the air smelled of dust and pine sap. The children ran to meet them barefoot, cheeks berry-stained, laughing. Later, after supper, Jessamine stood at the doorway, watching the stars blink out one by one as clouds rolled in. "I want to plant a row of cottonwood out front," she said. Rhett looked up from the ledger he'd been marking. "We got seed." "No, but we'll find some," he nodded. "We'll dig the holes come fall." She turned then, her smile soft and sure. "We're building something, Rhett, not just for us, for them, for what comes next." He stood and crossed to her, wrapping an arm around her shoulders. "We already started." She leaned against him, both of them watching the dark roll in, and nothing in either of them braced for loss. Not anymore. By early September, the cottonwoods had begun to yellow, and the air carried the first hints of frost in the mornings. Rhett had finished laying the last plank in the loft floor, and Jessamine had sewn curtains from leftover muslin, hanging them with bent nails and twine. Caleb had taken to sleeping with his feet tucked under the quilt Jessamine's mother had stitched long before Kansas turned bitter. Clara helped Rhett dig a trench for drainage behind the barn, her braid coming loose and cheeks streaked with mud, but proud all the same. One afternoon, Jessamine rode out alone along the southern ridge, where the grass grew in high golden waves and the wind moved through it like water. She stopped at the crest and sat a long while, the mare grazing behind her, the sun low and soft at her back. When she returned, Rhett was in the pasture, repairing the gate where a nail had come loose. "You went far," he said, glancing over. "I needed to," she said, sliding down from the saddle. "I buried something out there." He set the hammer down. "What was it?" The last of the fear. "It's not mine anymore." He wiped his hands on his trousers and reached for her. "Good. I've got no room for it, either." They stood there a long moment, her forehead resting against his chest, the mare flicking her tail behind them, the wind curling around the fence posts like it had nowhere better to be. Later, under lantern light, Rhett unrolled a paper he'd brought back from the post office. Jessamine leaned over his shoulder, her hands full of thread and a patch of Caleb's shirt. "It's from Cheyenne," he said. "A man named Weatherby. He's a land agent. Says there's a title ready if we want to make this place ours, legal and final." Jessamine set the thread down. "How much?" "Less than it should be. I think he knows how hard we worked it." She touched the edge of the paper. "We'll pay it," he nodded. "We'll ride in before the snow comes." That Sunday, they rode to the tiny clapboard church nestled beside the creek, the children dressed in clean clothes, their hair brushed smooth. It was the first time Jessamine had stepped inside a church since her husband's burial, but she walked in beside Rhett with her chin lifted and her hand resting lightly on his forearm. After the hymn, the preacher stopped them at the door. Folks are saying you've built something fine out there, he said. Jessamine smiled. It's more than fine. It's ours. On the ride back, Clara leaned against Jessamine's side and asked, will this always be our home? Jessamine looked to Rhett, who met her gaze. Yes, she said. The next week brought an early frost that silvered the grass and cracked the edges of the last beans in the garden. Rhett hauled the remainder inside, and Jessamine spent the better part of a day blanching and drying. Caleb helped by handing her jars, his fingers sticky with pear preserves. That evening they sat by the hearth, the warmth from the stove filling the room and the scent of dried herbs curling from the rafters. Rhett pulled a small box from the cupboard, wrapped in oilskin. He handed it to Jessamine without a word. She opened it slowly. Inside lay a ring of simple gold, the band narrow, the setting plain. She looked up at him. Where did you find this? Traded 4 pelts and a set of shoeing tools I don't use anymore. I wanted something that would last. Her hand trembled slightly. You didn't have to. I know, he said. But I wanted to. She slipped it on. It fit without effort, as though it had waited for her all along. I want to marry you, he said, voice low. Not for show, not for talk. Just so it's clear, to you and the children and the land under our boots, that this is forever. She blinked slowly, her face unreadable for a long moment. Then she reached up, touched his jaw with her thumb, and kissed him with a softness that steadied him straight through his ribs. Yes, she whispered, I do. They married quietly in late October. The preacher came to the house, his boots muddy and his hands calloused. Clara stood with a crown of last blooms woven into her hair, and Caleb held the Bible open from his lap, solemn as a judge. After the words were said, Jessamine turned to Rhett and took both his hands in hers. You gave me back something I thought was gone, he answered without hesitation. You gave me something I didn't know how to want until you. That night, after the children were tucked in and the lamps burned low, Jessamine stood at the window, watching the moon rise over the pasture. You know, she said, I used to think love was a fire, bright, quick, dangerous. But I think it's more like this. Rhett came behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist. Like what? Like a door that stays open, like warmth that doesn't burn. He kissed the spot beneath her ear. Then we'll keep it lit. They stood that way until the night deepened, and the wind settled into stillness. Years passed with the rhythm of seasons. The land bore steady. The children grew sure-footed and tall. Clara took to reading by lamplight and dreamed of becoming a teacher. Caleb followed Rhett into the pastures by age 9 and knew the lay of every fence post by heart. They built a second barn. They planted cottonwoods just as Jessamine had wanted. They never missed a harvest. And every night when the work was done and the stars blinked out one by one, Rhett and Jessamine sat together on the porch, hand in hand, hearts quiet and full. The house stood through storms, through winters, through time. And so did they.